Kintsugi Heroes brings you the following flood resilience stories in partnership with Singleton Neighbourhood Centre and grant funding from the Hunter New England and Central Coast Primary Health Network. To find out more about this podcast, head to kintsugiheroes.com.au. On July 6th, 2022, the worst flood in 70 years hit the town of Broke and the surrounding Hunter Valley region. The community is still recovering from the trauma the floods brought, destroying their homes and their livelihoods. In this special limited series of Kintsugi Heroes, John Millam sits down with the community who suffered as a result of the floods and gives them space to share their adversity, resilience, and compassion. It's only through connection and empathy that there can be a path to recovery. These are stories of trauma and can be confronting. If you find they have a triggering effect, please reach out to someone who can help keep you safe. Now listen in as John takes you beyond the deluge with Kintsugi Heroes.
So welcome all to another episode of Kintsugi Heroes, Beyond the Deluge. Stories of the floods from the Wollombi, Broke and surrounding area in 2022. Today, I'm really excited to talk to a member of the community that has come up often in conversation and as a focal point for the Wollombi community, Chris Brooks. Welcome, mate.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm pleased to be talking to you.
And it's so important because you were the proprietor of the Wollombi Tavern, of course, which is iconic when you think of Wollombi. Most, certainly, men of my era who ended up dropping in for a cold one more than once would associate that whole village with the tavern. So.
Yeah, it is the focal point of it. Wollombi is a small village, 2 hours from Sydney, but a long way from anywhere. And the tavern is certainly one of the major focal points for the local community and for tourists. It's probably the biggest attraction in the village.
Probably in the area. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun. Yeah, well, no matter where I go, if somehow it comes up in conversation that either I used to own or I owned the Wollombi Tavern. Everyone would straight away go, "Oh, Dr. Jerd's Jungle Juice."
And I'm afraid I'm guilty of that too. And interesting, I do have another element to it. For 3 years in a row, the rugby club I was a member of were beaten in the final of the tug of war at the Singleton picnic races by the Wollombi woodcutter team, which trained I think exclusively on Dr. Jerd's. Right, so they were a tough group.
Well, we still have a wood shop every year at the tavern. So, it's run by New South Wales Axemen. It's the same people you see at the Easter show. So they're a strong group. Yeah.
Amazing, and a very strong group in the tug of war. I can attest to that. So, but you obviously you came to Wollombi Tavern for on a bit of a windy journey. How about we start with just giving us a little bit of background about what led you to be sitting in the water as it came up above the floor in the Wollombi Tavern in July 2022.
Well, I was in the army in the early 80s, and so I discovered the tavern on our way up to regular trips up to Singleton.
Yeah.
And we would drop in occasionally. And then I didn't go there for a long time, and then in 2016, we decided we were going to buy a small hobby farm, and we sort of drew a circle around Sydney, 2 hours from Sydney, and Wollombi happened to fall into that circle, and I happened to turn up in Wollombi again and happened to find the property that I liked.
Yeah.
So I bought the hobby farm, and then talking to, it was my accountant, but friends of mine, and telling them how there's this little pub there and I love it, and if it came up for sale, I'd buy it, and I did in 2017. So we had it was a pretty rough trot of it, really, because we had the bushfires of 2019 and 2020. We went into a flood in 2020. There was a flood that broke the bushfires.
Yeah.
We then went into a first lockdown for COVID.
Wow.
Came back out of that, then went in the second lockdown for COVID. Then we had a flood in March in 2022. and then we had the big flood in July 2022, where it came basically up to the top of the doors at the pub.
So obviously, somebody somewhere in some dimension thought you needed a bit of testing there, because that's like quite a run, my man.
Yeah,
Just what moving into hospitality, loves, right? All of those challenging situations.
yeah. Look, I'm just one of these people that doesn't particularly get upset by things that I can't control. So I just keep carrying on. That's the way I do things. I'm lucky that I wasn't relying. I have another business in Sydney, although I do live up here in Wollombi now.
Mm,
I wasn't reliant on Wollombi for personal income as such. And, but I did have 12 staff, and,
mm,
they needed to be paid and looked after. So I did look after them, and I paid them even while we were shut. We were only shut for 2 weeks after the flood. We managed to reopen after 2 weeks in a very wish-washy way, but we were open. So, but yeah, it's I'm just someone who doesn't sweat that sort of stuff. So
which is just as well. Um, yeah. So it's interesting. So when you moved in, obviously, coming from Sydney, it's a world away. As you say, it's 2 hours, but a million miles. Um, what drew you to the area? What was the best thing about it?
well, I said to my wife, I want to buy my little piece of Australia. We lived in Sydney. We lived in this stupid big house in Sydney. But really only knew the two people next door to us and people across the road. Um, I drew this circle and came, and we looked at a number of properties, from Goulburn up to around north up here, up to sort of Singleton, I suppose. And we just found the place that we liked, and it happened to be in Wollombi. And I remembered, Wollombi from my younger adult
Yeah,
days.
yeah, yeah,
And then gradually we were absolute weekenders. We used to come up on Friday night and go back down on Sunday afternoon. And then when I bought the pub, we extended that to Mondays. We'd come up Friday and stay till Monday. And then after about a year of owning the pub, my wife said to me, "Well, why don't we just move up there permanently?"
mm, mm,
And so we did. We actually sold the farm and bought a house in town. Town is a very loose word in Wollombi. It's a very small village, but
mm.
we're still on about 5.5 acres here. But yeah, no, we just love the country lifestyle. In fact, we do go back to Sydney. We both got elderly parent still alive, and our son lives in Sydney. But we hate going to the Sydney now. We love it up here. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, it's got it starts to get into your bones, not least, right? Because when you fight for it, and you certainly had to fight for it a bit there with, the fires and then the floods.
Yeah, no, look, and the thing is, that was my point, I suppose, with the you only really know your neighbours either side of you.
Yeah,
Up here, you know everyone.
yeah.
Everyone knows you, and you know everyone. And as my wife said, if they don't know something about you, they make it up. But that's fine. And communities like that pull together in these sorts of times. During the fires, the pub was actually the focal point. We set up
Yeah,
the RFS community engagement at the pub because everyone could get into town and see what was happening the next day. And then in the floods, everyone came down and helped us clean the pub out and get us open again. So it's a lovely place to live in. Any country town's the same, but it's a lovely place to live. Yeah.
yeah. So your experience of the flood, as you said, you'd been through a bit. Wollombi was not unfamiliar with getting a bit of water, especially down by the river. So, like you said, you had some water coming up in March. How did that affect your preparation for July?
Probably made us a bit lackadaisical about it, to be honest. The last big flood up here before the 2022 was 2007. That was, most people remember the weekend the Pasha Bulka ran aground at Newcastle.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, that was and in that flood, it came up to about bar level.
Right. Wow.
So in the March flood, that came up, like I say, to probably about a metre below the floor. But that meant we had all our air conditioning units are under the floor.
Yeah.
A lot of our refrigeration is under the floor, so like refrigeration machinery. So there was a fair bit of fixing up after that one, but it's not it wasn't massive. It wasn't, and didn't destroy us. We were reopened within, a few days. So,
Yeah.
and then when the July flood came, actually one of my staff, he lives further up the creek, and he's lived here all his life, so he understands exactly what happens. And he rang me and he said, "This is going to be a big one." And that was like a couple of days before, and because it takes a while for the water to come down. That's the thing
Yeah.
about floods; they're insidious. They come very slowly. It's at least you can fight a fire. You can't fight a flood.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, a lot of people have said that. In some ways, from two things they've offered. The first thing is you can sort of line it up and stop it almost, or at least have the sense of doing that. And the second is when it's done, it leaves a much less mess behind.
Absolutely, it actually cleans itself up.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
beauty of fire. So, but yeah, so what happened was so he told me it was going to be a big one. So we actually put everything up above bar level because we thought, it'll probably, if it's going to be bad, can't be worse than 2007.
Wow.
Well, it was, like I say, probably about 1.5 meters higher than that. So it's the biggest flood since 1949.
Yeah.
And there's across the road from the pub is the museum, which is the old courthouse, and it's got a brass plaque on the wall where the height of the 1949 came to, and it was probably about 1 meter below that.
Wow. 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 And so you did some prep. How was the feeling in the town? Just another challenge. There'd have been quite a few, everything from droughts to COVID and stuff.
Look, I knew the history of flooding in the town, not quite as much as I know now.
Mm.
Some locals sort of tell you that it's pretty much flooded every year. That people who are born and bred here, so it pretty much floods every year. But in fact, there's a saying in town: we actually like a small flood, because small floods just sort of give us a bit of downtime, a bit of quiet time. So so you sort of, like I say, you come a little bit blasé about them.
Yeah.
Everyone who lives in this area has, sort of a week's worth of food and what have you all the time, because we just know that it's going to happen every now and then.
Mm.
This one was very different. Like, I literally live 1 kilometre from the pub, and I would have had to put a boat in the water 3 times to get to it. So put it in, get it out, put it in, get it. And I was told many years ago when I first brought up here, told about how it floods, and then they actually, at one point, they proposed to build a dam here and dam the valley. So they only build dams where there's a lot of water.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's sort of something you just got to be prepared for. So, my house is high and dry. Most houses in town are high and dry. The lowest actual building in town is the pub. So, yeah.
And it's beautifully situated by the river there, in this very sort of picturesque little place with gardens and outlook.
Yeah, the pub's actually on about 8 acres, so it's quite but that's it. It's a floodplain, so you can't really do anything with it. But and to give people an idea, if anyone ever goes up there and sees how low the creek normally is when it's running, the flood came through at over 12 meters. Yeah, so it's pretty high. Yeah, and the other bad thing, the other amazing thing I should say is everything floats away. Water tanks float away, even if they're full of water. Outdoor furniture all floats away, even though you can barely lift it, it's that heavy. The ice machine box floated away, even though it was full of ice. So, and gas tanks. So, we don't have any services. We're on tank water, bottled gas, and septics. And that's the really horrible bit, is a lot of septic tanks go under. And so the flood water is actually quite toxic.
Yeah.
So you have to then clean out everything, So yeah, there's a lot of work, but you just got to get on with it,
Yeah. Well, that I guess you can look back and say you've got to get on with it, but for the people who are underwater, of course, it's devastating. How did what was it like watching the water come up your walls?
Well, in the March one, we actually sat out the back of the pub and drank some beer, watched it come up. It was a sort of, you don't ever expect it to get as high as it does.
Yeah.
And the thing was, the peak of that flood flood was actually at between 12 midnight and 1 in the morning.
Right.
And I actually have a photo taken by the only local who was capable of taking a photo, um, and he just happened to take it at 12:30 a.m. that day. So I've got a picture of the flood at its peak,
Wow.
which is quite incredible.
Yeah.
And you look at it, and you stand there where the picture was taken, look at it now, and people just go, "You cannot believe it." No, um, it's a phenomenal amount of water in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
So, in fact, we just had another flood last week. So, yeah, only small, but it broke the banks, but not by much. So,
Wow. And so sort of it's a almost a contract between you and the like the gifts of the local area also come with a sort of payment due next time it rains type thing.
well, that's one way of looking at it. But I suppose you just get used to it. It's part and parcel of living here. Wollombi is actually an Aboriginal word for meeting of the waters, because it's like Wollombi Brook, which is the actual creek. There's a north arm and a south arm, and they meet just north of Wollombi, and then head all the way up through to Broke, and then all the way through to the Hunter River.
Wow.
So it's an actual system that everyone understands. So if the Hunter River's flooding, the water coming out of Wollombi Brook has got nowhere to go.
Mm.
And so it gradually backs up through Broke and back to us, and then back through Laguna. And and then it's just contained here because we're a very narrow valley with very high hills both sides and quite steep. So when it rains, and it really depends too which way the rain comes. So the little flood we had last week, that actually came from the northern brook, which is a bit different to the southern brook, which is where the pub is. So it depends which brook comes as well, who gets flooded and who doesn't get flooded. So, I sound like a really well-versed local. I've been here for 8 years now, but and owning the pub, obviously, I get to talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I've sort of become a bit of an expert overnight, I suppose. But it's sort of it is just interesting. I'm in the local RFS too, so I was there for the bushfires as well. So
Yeah. Wow.
it's you. If you couldn't put up with it, you just have to leave because you can't stop it. That's really the answer. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I found it interesting. Like the pub is a central community hub, right? Sort of almost a community center in some ways, right? Everyone mentions it when they're talking about their place. And of course, it's key to economic well-being as well as that sort of community focus. How do people view not just the business, but the history, the entity that is, the meeting place, which is the pub, really?
Yeah, look, there's people, there's obviously a core group of people who go to the pub on a regular basis,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you know all of those people intimately. Down at the next village, which is Laguna, which is only 7 kilometres south of here, there is a place called G&TP, which is not it's a wine. Everyone calls it the wine bar. It's not actually a pub. So there's a lot of people go there. There's sort of two groups of people and a bit of cross matching between the two. But in Wollombi itself, if anyone comes to Wollombi's got a T intersection.
yeah,
You either go north to Broke and Singleton, south to Laguna and Sydney, or east to Cessnock. And then can't go anywhere else. There's only those two. And the pub sits right on the end of that T intersection. So it really is the dead centre of town. It is the driver of the economics of the town because it's really the only thing that attracts. There's a couple of little cafes and things, but it really does drive the two. And we are a tourist town. The town. I mean, it's a farming community as well. It's a big cattle farming area around here, but the town itself and the businesses rely on the fact that pub's a pretty big draw card.
well,
So, the community, everyone knows what the pub is. Everyone knows where the pub is. It's you can't miss it. It's not a very big place. It's actually quite a small place, but it used to be very big until Mel Jerd burnt it down in the 50s. But and that's actually an indication of community spirit. Back in the 1950s, Mel Jerd, who was the famous Dr. Jerd, even though he was never a doctor, he accidentally burnt the place down when he put petrol in the kerosene fridges. They had kerosene fridges then. And there's people up here who still have kerosene fridges.
yeah.
And it burnt down. And the story is, well, and the truth of the matter is the community rebuilt the pub in 6 weeks.
Wow.
That's how important it was to this
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it hasn't always been the only pub in the area. The Wollombi actually had 4 pubs at one stage.
Wow.
And what a lot of people don't realise is Wollombi was meant to be quite a big not metropolis, but it's we sit on the Great North Road,
Yeah.
and it's got it's got 2 sandstone churches, it's got a sandstone school, two sandstone, a telegraph office, and another hotel. It wasn't a pub, but a hotel. It was, and the sandstone courthouse,
Yeah.
and a big magistrate's place that was built about a kilometre out of town. So it was meant to be a main thing until coal was discovered at Cessnock in Newcastle, and that's when Wollombi sort of got cut off.
Right.
So, but it was the Great North Road. The Great North Road. People in Sydney, there's still the Great North Road through Five Dock. That's the same. That's the same road. So
Great.
yeah.
Wow. Wow. And of course, even beyond that, back as you mentioned, right, way back into First Nations, Wollombi had significance then too.
It did, yes. It's Wollombi is very significant. I'm told. I don't profess to be an expert on this at all, but I am told that Mount Yengo, which is just over the back of us, is the second most sacred site in Australia.
Wow.
We have a lot of Aboriginal carvings around here. We have Tidlick the frog, which anyone who knows some Dreamtime, Tidlick's one of the big Dreamtime stories. Well, Tidlick is actually in Wollombi. There's this rock form. It's amazing. When you see it, it's Tidlick's a frog. When you look at this rock, you go, yeah, that's a frog. It really does look like. But Wollombi is interesting because it doesn't actually belong to any one nation. That's why it was a meeting place.
Right.
So they used to come here to meet. So that the Darkinjung the Darkinjung are the Wobbicals, and I think there's another one.
Yeah,
So
Warranung or
yeah. So there's at least 3 that border on Wollombi, but none of them actually own it apparently.
Right. Wow.
So, although we do have an little Aboriginal cultural centre in the middle of town. They take people for tours and stuff.
So unbelievable. I love that. How did you feel when you walked in? Did you get a sense that you were inheriting sort of custodianship of all of that import, that place?
Very much so. I very much, I was determined not to change anything straight away, which I do have to add is unfortunately a mistake that new owners have made. I was determined not to change things. I was determined to take on board the history of the place. It's not just the pub history, but the history of the town. The people I bought it off. They're a family that has been here since the 1800s.
Wow.
There was a brother and sister who were the main. There was 4 partners who owned it before me, and there was a brother and sister, and they were of a family name. There's about half a dozen family names up here that have been here forever.
Yeah.
And they're one of them. It was like I said, it was the brother, because they both still worked for me after I bought the pub too. But the brother was the one who rang me to tell me that the flood was coming. Dennis is his name, and so I was determined to, and I researched what I could about the pubs. Like I have a research back to the day they first built the pub, which was back. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it's back in the early 1800s.
Oh.
They actually moved, and it wasn't called Wollombi Tavern then. It was actually called Hawkesbury Hotel.
Wow.
But it went through a few different things. It became a boarding house for a while. It did get rebuilt a couple of times. So the incantation before the current one, it was a 2-story timber place.
Right.
The original one was a sandstone place. It was moved up here from sort of around Wiseman's Ferry, St Albans way.
Maybe that's why it was the Hawkesbury. They came from the Hawkesbury.
Came from the Hawkesbury, yeah. And my family connection goes back to surprisingly enough, my family goes back to Wiseman's Ferry and traced back to 1803.
Wow.
So, and a lot of local families here came from Wiseman's Ferry. So as I say to people, I'm probably related to a lot of you somewhere along the way. So
it makes sense. Why that Wiseman's population was the first one to break out. So they were probably the frontiersmen, the trailblazers.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, it was Yeah, well, my grandfather was even born at Wiseman's Ferry. So,
My goodness.
yeah.
Wow. So when you inherited that sense of custodianship, what did you discover about the town, and what conclusions did you come to?
Oh, look, it's a very quiet little place now, but it's been a boom and, well, not so much a bust, but it's been a bit of a boom and bust place as different industries came and went.
Mm.
At one stage, it was a massive dairy industry. There's not a dairy farm to be seen around here at all now.
No.
Um, it was very much a logging industry place. Like I say, at one stage, it had there was at least 4 pubs at one time in the town. One of the things that one of the big histories of the tavern itself was that land at the back.
Mm.
It was mainly used for the old bullocky um, guys coming up to pick up the timber. So they camp overnight there and keep their bullocks at the back there. And then now it has actually done a bit of a turn back around to cattle. So it's now beef cattle,
Mm.
but not big concerns. It's properties around here. Whilst properties can be in hundreds of acres, often most of that is inaccessible, or not inaccessible, but not useful for farming.
Yeah,
So
yeah, small herds and yeah.
small herds. But we do have a cattle sale yard in town, for instance. Which is still once a month. They might have a cattle sale there. Most cattle sales go up to Singleton now, yeah, but yeah, it's still just a nice, quiet little country town. Especially the main thing I could say about it. It sort of had its boom times. It's had its not so much bust times, but it's gone back to just being. I suppose if I was to say a negative about, I sound like I say everything's positive. The negative about the place at the moment is it's actually getting very expensive to live here,
Right.
and so it's actually keeping the sort of younger generation from sort of being able to buy here. You can,
Yeah.
property here is at Sydney price because it's full of. We've got more. I reckon our population of lawyers and accountants is bigger than anywhere else in Australia.
Right. Right.
Yeah, all with these holiday homes. I mean, for instance, uh, the Noyce family come from here. So Phil Noyce, who
Yeah,
made
yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they've got a winery. But to give you an example, Phil Noyce is a filmmaker. Michael Noyce is a lawyer.
Yeah.
The other brother, who I don't know his name, sorry, is a surgeon. And their place is worth squillions. So
Yeah.
it is a shame. I think that's happening in quite a few country towns, but it's a shame that a lot of Sydney people buy weekend properties up here. And the other killer is these Airbnbs and what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of them now. So
Yeah. Well, that's like a modern challenge, isn't it, for to keep traditions and lifestyles in place, given all of these kind of external challenges.
yeah, well, it's well, that's the thing. People come up here and fall in love with the beauty of the place. I mean, it's a beautiful place, it's quintessential. And you come in, it's a cute little town, but this is how much people fall in love with it at Laguna. There was very rich gentleman who was very, but well, benevolent.
Mm.
He actually built a full-size cricket ground for the area out of his own money. If
Wow.
it still sits there and it gets flooded, but it's got a white picket fence. I'm told that it's the same size as North Sydney Oval. Now,
Oh, wow.
that's on
Wow.
his private property, but the local cricket club's allowed to play there. And only since we've been here, he built I'm not sure how many lanes it is off the top of it, but he built a 25-meter pool for the community to use
Oh.
for free. There's a few rules and things. I won't go to that, but
Yeah, obviously, but yeah.
but he fought with council because they tried to make him do all sorts of things. But anyway, and that's the sort of thing. That's how much people fall in love with the place.
Yeah.
In fact, that was one of the reason I was made an offer for the pub was because another gentleman up here was trying to buy a lot of things. A lot of people don't like that, but he was buying a lot of things to make sure it didn't fall into the wrong hands.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Because he loves the place.
Well, and it's that love, like, in talking to people, I noted that they would, you mentioned it as well, that they came to get the pub back on track right after, obviously when the water's so high, nearly to the ceiling, right? a business is, especially floodwater, a business is impacted badly.
Yeah, no, well, we had people out. The streets were blocked anyway, so the whole street out the road out the front of the pub was just a mass of people washing things, cleaning things, working out what we're going to throw away. And look, one of the biggest couple of things people don't even. I didn't realise either, to be honest, but everything that's used for food preparation has to be thrown
Has to
away.
go, yeah.
Anything that cannot be successfully washed has to be thrown away. You lose things, you lose TVs, you lose computers, printers, you lose all of that. But one of the worst things, I shouldn't say one of the worst things, but it's something I never even thought of. Was in the kitchen we have deep fat fries because it's a pub. It does schnitzels and chips.
Yeah.
Well, all the oil comes out of the fryer and basically coats everything in this layer of oil, which is just disgusting. It's slippery in there because kitchen floors are prone to be slippery anyway. The building itself wasn't really damaged when we lost all the electrical. So that was the main reason it took us 2 weeks to reopen, was because we had to redo all the electrics. But the building itself actually survived remarkably intact. Some doors swelled, but the building itself was pretty good. Oh, the bar collapsed. But the beauty of it was, like I said, the people who were buying the pub off me anyway, they were going to renovate anyway. So in some ways, it actually saved them money because a lot of stuff that they were going to throw away anyway was thrown away. And, the council were very good. Council were excellent, to be honest. They provided big, giant skip bins for us to put all the stuff in, and removed it when we rang them. There was a lady at council, it was her responsibility, and she's still there and she's fantastic. You can ask her for anything. Most people love to bag their local councils. I say they were. Well, my wife rang and said, "Are you going to come?" Because I think Singleton Council sent out their guys to clean up the streets, to pick up all the rubbish. My wife rang council to say, "Are you guys sending out someone?" And they said no. And then next thing, Melissa, that's the lady there, rang her back and said, "No, I'll arrange for skip bins to come out. And you tell me when they're full and I'll arrange for them to be picked up." We had to put everything in, but that's fine. I mean, we didn't like. But I had locals come down with bobcats to help move the heavy equipment and put the stuff that we had to throw out, fridges and stuff that we had to throw out.
That roaming ice machine?
Yeah, the roaming ice machine. Well, we've actually lost 3 of them since we've owned the pub. In fact, the ice paid people said, "We're not going to give you another one," but I ended up talking them into giving me another one.
Right.
But
well, we'll give them a plug here now. Thank you very much. Right.
Well, one has still never been found. One of the ice boxes, and I'm talking quite a big one. It holds 300 bags of ice, so it's not really small. And the other big shout out I've got to give to is the army. When the army turned up, that was just so good having these they were young blokes. They'd just finished their recruit course, and they were up at Singleton waiting to be deployed to their regiments or their various, whoever they were going to. They turned up. They had a young lieutenant, a couple of corporals, and they would do anything. And even down to the lieutenant, being ex-army, I sort of, he came up and he said, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm not going to ask you to do anything." He said, No, I'm here to work too. So, but the army would do anything. We had I don't know if people know what a palicon is. A palicon is one of those cubes you see with the metal frame with the white plastic that they carry liquid in.
Yeah.
One of them was on the roof of the pub. So, and the army.
That was the firefighting stuff ended up on the roof after the flood, right?
Yeah. And one of the army boys came and said, "What else do you want us to do?" I said, "Well, if you can get that down off the roof now for me, that'd be great." I'm in my 60s now. Climbing on roofs is not my go anymore. So I know nothing was a problem for them. Yeah. In fact, one of the ice box that on that one, it had tipped over on its back. So they actually climbed in to get all the ice bags out.
Wow. Wow.
So because it had floated away and laid down on its back. So so it's amazing the goodwill of a lot of people. The first thing that happens here in a flood is the fire brigade comes and hoses everyone's properties out. So because that's what you got to do. You got to get rid of that mud. The mud is the killer.
Yeah.
It stinks. It sticks like it just sticks. You don't want to let the mud dry out. You got to get into it while it's wet.
Wow.
So, like I said, being part of the fire brigade, I even sort of left the pub a few days and went and did my bit hosing out other people's places.
I love the story. And the army get a good, those young blokes. They've certainly impressed a lot of people in Broke and Wollombi now. So well done. What about you? As you said, you were with the RFS. How do you Australia relies on volunteer first responders, right? Do you think that works?
Well, it does, only because it has to, which may sound like a silly thing. It unfortunately for us up here, I can't tell you the exact average age of our members, but it's a very much an aging membership of our RFS. And we are in a very difficult area to fight fires because it's very steep,
Yeah.
and other fire brigades hate coming out to help us when we have a fire because
Yeah.
no one realizes just how steep it is here. And we have no water. So it makes it interesting. It's something that I think a lot of the old timers are determined that it's got to be volunteer.
Yeah.
It's far more demanding now. I'm actually just about to become the captain of Wollombi. I'm the senior deputy captain at the moment. And really, the captain's job is almost a full-time job.
Yeah.
It has to be someone who's retired, basically, and has the time to put in the amount of time that sort of because the RFS is the professional side of the RFS has turned into such a monster.
Yeah.
It's a monster that needs to be fed all the time, and they just find new, better ways to make us do things for them. And it's also, you know, get on my little soapbox here, but it's too easy for them to call us out all the time because it's free, basically. I mean, like obviously that there's a lot of equipment that's been supplied and paid for and what have you, but it's very easy to turn out people who aren't getting paid, and
Yeah.
I think you should have this massive sort of disparity between fire and rescue and rural fire service that they're what's called retained firefighters get paid when they get called out. During the 2019, 2020 fires, there was a lot of people here who put in 30 plus days, and they're 12-hour days. So, and 2 shifts a day. So 8 till 8 and 8 till 8.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people from outside who came to help us too, who did that as well. But, or maybe not the 30, but that's a lot of time for people to give up. A lot of these people are self-employed.
Yeah.
So they're actually not making money and losing money at the same time by losing property. And
Yeah.
we did pretty well in the fires. We didn't lose too much property, but it's a lot to ask for volunteers and then be so strict about what you tell them what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
That's probably where, the idea of RFS back in the day when you ran it from sausage sizzles and, it was bought an old army truck and painted it red, put a pump on the back and might have given you a pair of white overalls or something, I mean, we do walk around in $300 fire boots now that are given to us, but, it's still a lot of work and effort. And like I said, I'm in my early 60s now. I struggle walking up and down there. I've actually been told I've got to have a hip replacement, so I probably won't be doing it for too many more years. But it is hard, and with not having a supply of younger people living in the area, we're not getting the new people to replace the people we lose. So, it's hard. Yeah.
Some models might have to be looked at into the future.
Yeah. Well, even down to you go and do courses and things, and you got to do them on weekends, or at night. And the other thing about the RFS, like all organisations, everything's becoming more digital. And now that's scaring away the older people because a lot of people, particularly in this, like for instance, here at Wollombi, within driving 1 kilometre in either direction from the pub, you no longer have phone connection.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, we've got one Telstra tower in town. If you're a Telstra customer, you don't get. So heading to Sydney, you've got to drive about 30 to 40 kilometres before you actually get mobile phone connection again.
Yeah.
So people up here don't have smartphones necessarily.
No. And of course, in the flood, that was an issue, right?
Absolutely.
So now, we've heard about the program to roll out citizen ban and, communication alternatives, I guess.
Yeah. Again, but of course, we've got lots of little valleys, even the government radio network, which is what the RFS, police, ambulance all work on, doesn't work in half the valleys around here. And that was actually a big thing, bit of discomfort or disquiet amongst the community.
Yeah.
The RFS were forbidden to go into certain areas during the fire because it wasn't safe, because we had no communications. Well, the people who lived in those areas weren't particularly happy about that.
No, you can imagine. So did some of those issues like that, did you notice come up in the floods, right? Highlighting some of the gaps?
Not so much the floods. I mean, you still got the issue of no mobile phones. And they've sort of stopped servicing, landlines around here now. So, and people are dropped. Well, I just dropped my landline because I don't need it anymore. The best thing that's happened to here in a long time is Starlink.
Yeah.
I don't really want to give them a plug, but
No.
Starlink works. Our other choices here were I was still on ADSL until I got Starlink. Or you got that Sky Muster, which is not particularly good either. And so both of those were and we rely heavily on digital, and so yeah, Starlink has really, if that keeps going and works the way they believe it's going to work. We're on satellite TV here. We can't even get TV from a TV aerial.
No,
so,
wow. Man.
Yeah, so it is 2 hours from Sydney and a million miles from nowhere.
Which kind of reminds me, like the flood. So your business, your home's okay, but the business, which is iconic to the villages, has been, completely inundated. And then you've got, the community coming around and helping you, and then, the community itself repairing and cleaning itself up and, nursing its wounds. What do you think? Was there anything good that came out of this experience? You're very positive about the process and accepting of the challenge. Yeah. What benefits come from community facing a situation like this?
Oh, well, I think the biggest benefit is it just reinforces that community spirit. I suppose that's the biggest benefit. We all know each other. We know we need to help each other on a regular basis. We've had elderly people around here that people used to go, well, unfortunately they've died now, but people would go around and light their fire for them, or go around and make sure that they got out of bed okay that morning. You wouldn't see it in the city.
No.
I suppose that's what it does. It just reinforces that we are reliant on each other.
Yeah.
We look out for each other a lot, and we try to help each other as much as we can. And I'm not going to say everyone loves everyone around here. That's just impossible.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of good people, and I'm sure there's a lot of good people everywhere in the world. But what I'm a Sydney born and bred. I lived in Sydney for, well, what was it, 56 years. So, and well, my childhood in Sydney in the 60s. Yes, we used to go out until the lights came on and all that sort of thing. But nowadays, people just you don't even know who your neighbours are, let alone talk to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference and that's reinforced by, natural disasters that happen. And unfortunately, Wollombi is massively prone to flooding, and we're equally massively prone to bushfires. It's a very heavily timbered area now, despite the fact that it was a logging area. It's very heavily timbered. Like, you come out here now, you can barely pick anything from the 2019, 2020 fires. In fact,
wow, that's amazing.
Basically completely grown back. So, and we were surrounded by fire. So when in my house, I could sit here at night and see that just an orange glow completely around us.
Yeah. Well, now that like you got through, the pub was cleaned up, the floating debris was gathered and disposed of. And you started trading, and then you've moved on. What do you think you've learnt from this experience, right? So, you've been through a few different things, and now another big flood.
I just think you got to learn I just think you learn resilience. Like, at the end of the day, life's not easy. It's the old Paul Keating, take.
Yeah. Wasn't meant to be easy.
Life's not meant to be easy. And you can sit down and curl up in a ball and cry and the flood in particular was very hard on my wife.
Yeah.
She was fine through the fire. She's in the fire brigade as well, but she's fine through the fire. She's a nurse, so she's used to seeing, disaster and what have you, and people in pain. But the flood actually hit her fairly hard. So we actually went away on a bit of an extended holiday after the flood. But yeah, I'm just, my wife hates, she says you're just too laid back, I mean, but I don't know. I've never really expected anyone to do anything for me. So ever since I left the army, I've pretty much worked for myself, and I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I probably, I've made my own bed, and I've always just worked hard. I mean, my whole life, I've just never expected anyone to do anything. And then to come to a place like this and see people go out of their way to help you in lots of different ways, people do whatever they could, it's, I know I keep harking back to the fires, but, the stuff that people were dropping down at the fire shed during those fires, just cakes and, lasagna, and also, well, and big, donating chainsaws and the same at the pub, people would say, is there anything we can do? Is there anything I can do? Mind you did have some idiots as well, and mainly tourists who'd come up. And I think that was what got to my wife more than anything, was some of the people came up just to have a look. And, we're in the middle of trying to clean the place out. And these people pull up in their little flash Mercedes-Benz sports car and wander across the road and start asking stupid. I can't remember, one of them asked a really stupid question, which I can't even think what it was. But my wife actually swore at them and told them in no uncertain terms to get out of town. So, but the thing is that the people in the area would never do that. People around here, they just know. People know that and look, and I suppose the other one was the help. People, like I said before, people are very quick to bag the council and bag government. The help and assistance that was offered without us necessarily asking for, the Services New South Wales sent people out just to check that everyone, they actually set up in the community hall was above the flood mark. They set up Services New South Wales people there to go through with people what they're entitled to, what they could do. One was a specialist business person. She was very good. Local members, all councillors came out, and not to big hope themselves, I must admit. People do tend to give them a bit of a hard time. They were generally concerned and wanting to see what they could do to help. One was our new member in federal government, a guy by the name of Dan Rapaccioli, and he's big. You can't miss him. I'm 6'2". He's about 6'27". He's a massive guy with a massive big beard, and he'd only just been voted in, and he dropped in here a couple of times. Now, it's a long way out of the way, whether he's in Canberra or whether he's in Cessnock, for a busy man. And before that, Joel Fitzgibbon was our member. And he came out here a few times, earlier, like in the fires and stuff. And they're lovely people.
Yeah.
I don't think we see the good side of politicians at all on the mainstream media. But
I could be cynical and ask which side is the good side of a politician, right? The one that's walking away from you, right? But obviously that's not the case here.
Well, I'm not basing it on parties. I'm not even basing it on politics. They're just human beings.
Yeah,
it's like anyone, high-profile sports people. That when you get to know some of them, I used to have a fairly large involvement in rugby league in Sydney, and so I knew a lot of high-profile and ex-high-profile, older high-profile rugby league players, and they're just lovely people when you get them away from things, and I think that's the beauty of living in a community like this, is you already know that about people. You already know exactly what they're like because you've spoken to them. You run into them we've got one general store in town. We've got 2 cafes and a pub. That's it. It's pretty hard to avoid people. So, and even because we go into Cessnock for our sort of shopping and that, which
Yeah.
Cessnock's only 25 minutes away, but that's 25 minutes at 100 kilometres an hour. So it's, but you can't walk through Woolworths without having to stop 5 times to have a chat with someone from Wollombi.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
and I'm sure Broke is the same. I mean, I know Broke's very much the same. It's Broke's a little bit. Well, it's a bit different to Wollombi, but yeah, it's a similar sort of place.
Well, I think maybe everything's different to Wollombi, right?
Yeah.
It's a fairly unique place. So, and I love that. So, given that character and obviously the incredible positivity that you have for the place, what do you think's in the future for Wollombi and the area?
Well, I can see it changing now. A lot of the sort of, like I say, a lot of the more original local people, or people who have been here a long time. It's Wollombi's reinvented itself every time. We actually have quite an aged population, like I mentioned earlier. So we've got a lot of people sort of in their 70s.
Mm.
And they're just lovely old people. But when you listen to their stories, they're actually hippies who came up here in the 70s because they could smoke dope and, keep out of
Hide in the tree line, right?
keep out of the limelight.
Yeah.
And now they're these, 70 and 80-year-old people, lovely, sweet old ladies and gentlemen who were once just these and who were once just these sort of free spirit wild people, and unfortunately what's driving them out of here is health issues.
Yeah.
We're a long way from well, to go to the doctor, you have to go. We do have a couple of doctors who live here around here, but they work elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, to go to the doctor, you got to go to Cessnock at minimum, and to get to a decent hospital, you probably got to go to Sydney.
Yeah. Wow.
Or John Hunter, but it's sort of, that's probably the thing that will drive the next change around here. There'll probably be there's a bit of real estate on the market at the moment, but it's grossly overpriced.
Mm.
But what will drive the next change around here will be that there will be a generational change, because there is, like I say, it's a fairly high percentage of the population is in that aging, sort of needing access to healthcare age group.
Yeah.
But, we've got a thriving little school down at Laguna, Wollombi School. Wollombi School is actually run as an Aboriginal school now by Barker College.
Oh, wow.
But the public school, there was a Wollombi Public School and Laguna Public School, and over the years, one's closed and one's open, depending on where the kids live mostly. Yeah. At the moment, they're all at Laguna. But, it's a good little school. It's been there for, Wollombi School was built in 1852. So, and Laguna School not that much longer after that.
So it is changing. You're predicting a change. What would you hope that change would bring to the area?
I think just to keep it. I hope people move here because they want to live the Wollombi lifestyle, not because they want to come and change Wollombi.
Yeah,
that would probably be my thing. It's, but what's sort of stopping that, I suppose, is the cost. Like I say, good friends of ours, their house burnt down a few weeks ago, or probably a couple of months ago now, come to think of it. But, in fact, Tidlick is on their property, the Tidlick Frog. But their house burnt to the ground. They want to move out now. They're sort of, the few bad things, they can't put up with it. They're staying in the area because they actually own a business in the area. They own a wine bus tour business. Right. But even she said to us, for what we would pay, for a lot less money in other parts of the Hunter, we can get exactly what you get in Wollombi, or for what you pay for what you're going to buy in Wollombi, you can get a much better property elsewhere. And probably the difference is you're not getting that little bit of Wollombi. But it's just a shame. I think the things when we first bought here, it was quite achievable to sort of buy around here at a reasonable price. Not necessarily a big house or something, but there's a lot for sale at the moment, not a lot selling. Look, the best example I can give you is the general store. The general store has been for sale since before COVID.
Right.
In my humble opinion, they're a bit greedy. They want too much money. But to run a general store that's open 7 days a week you're really looking for a young family.
Yeah, yeah. That's been the
that,
traditional entry point, isn't it?
yeah, it's a young family who, mum and dad basically run it most of the time. The kids help out on weekends, or they might have a couple of staff members or whatever. The problem is to buy that general store, it's close on $2 million that they want.
Wow.
Then to buy, you can't buy a house around here for under $1.5 million.
Wow.
What young family trying to get out of Sydney's got $3.5–4 million?
Wow.
And,
No.
and that's pretty much a starting point up here, So
it'll definitely change then in the future. I wonder if, as you say, like you would like the inheritors of the Wollombi tradition to keep things, related to what it's always been. I wonder if that includes future floods.
Well, it'd have to, I mean, you'll never hear anyone around here say, "Oh, the government's got to do something about the flooding." You'll never hear that. It's a bit like they say the people of Kintsugi. People say, "Oh, they should just move them all out of there." None of them want to move.
No,
it's pretty much the same here. So,
yeah.
And unless you've lived through a flood, the idea of flood mitigation for a flood like that one in July 2022, even if they built mitigation that would have stopped the flood, would have at the 2007 level, would have gone over it.
Yeah. It's always eventually records are set to be broken, aren't they?
Exactly. And I think that's something that, you just have to accept that that's what happens here. And there's a lot of people who have properties here. I'm not going to mention names, but people who don't have to live here, but they live here because, well, they not necessarily live here, but they got property here, but they want it because they love it, not because they, I've cleaned out not so much houses. Most houses are built above flood levels, common flood levels. The village is probably the village itself is probably most at risk because it's probably at the lowest point. But there's a lot of relatively famous people who own property up here, and they've been here for years, and they've had But what you do is you go and wash out sheds, and not necessarily house, but washing out sheds and outbuildings sort of thing that go under, and they still stay there. Washing down tennis courts. So it's amazing seeing a tennis court. I don't know. I don't know if you saw in any of your visits around here the amount of the detritus that was on fences and stuff. Like,
oh yeah, the brush fences, like where they were once wire fences and now they're yeah.
Well, you imagine that with a tennis court.
Yeah,
a tennis court is 10 times as bad.
Wow.
And look, and there's another thing that people don't see. There's people who will come out and just pick all that rubbish off the fence for you.
Yeah.
There's actually a mob that come and do that, and they're volunteers. So I suppose if you believe in the goodness of human spirit and you see it occasionally, it makes these things not so bad in the big term. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are nowhere near as positive as me. There's plenty of people who got quite distraught and possibly permanently damaged by living through the floods.
Well, there was trauma and people suffered. Yeah.
No, look, I openly admit that. We had a guy here literally settled on his property on the Friday before the flood.
Wow.
And it completely went under. It was one of the only houses that went under. And the interesting thing about that was the previous owner, it's a 2-story house, and the previous owner had paid a fortune to have these flood-proof doors put in on the lower level.
Right.
Well, that was after the March flood. So he paid a fortune to put these flood-proof doors in. Come July, when the new owners just bought it on the premise that it's got flood-proof doors, no, they weren't flood-proof.
Oh gosh.
So
there's a hard lesson to learn the hard way.
Oh, exactly. Well, I never actually got to see them because, and I'm a builder. That's my business in Sydney, is building. And I can't imagine how you can build a workable hinge door that is flood-proof.
No.
So, I mean, to make things waterproof, you go and have a look at what's on board ships and Navy ships and merchant ships to make a weatherproof door. There's a hell of a lot different to the doors to a house.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Well, that's been fascinating, Chris, and thank you so much. It's been amazing to hear how enthusiastic you are for both the area and the efforts people made to support each other, and also just, the acceptance that's, that it's part of the process of living in Wollombi.
Yeah, well, it's like wherever you go. My wife and I, we went for a bit of a drive around Western New South Wales a couple of weeks ago, just to get away from the place for a while. And there was a lot of grass fires at the time, and just seeing some of these big grass fires, which we don't see here at all,
No,
pretty
no.
much, because we're not a cropping or grain area at all. I personally think a lot of those fires were lit on purpose to clean up after the harvest. But and just see that's a different thing, and drought. We have gone through drought here, but drought here is nothing like drought out
west, yeah.
out west. And so actually prior from when I bought up here to 2019, we were in a drought for that 5 years, but it was called a green drought because it rained enough for it to remain green. But I think everyone has their challenges, so it doesn't matter where you go. Living in Sydney is just a challenge to get from one place to another in some sort of reasonable time.
A very difficult challenge at times.
Yeah, so no, I don't miss that. I love it up here. So the positives way outweigh the negatives. So
beautiful. Well, thank you, mate. Thank you for sharing some time and your stories with us. And I'd like to acknowledge, your energy, your commitment to your community, your service in that way too, which you haven't really talked about, but other people have. So appreciate it, mate. Good on you.
No, thanks, John. It's been a pleasure. I actually enjoyed talking about it too. I find it quite cathartic to talk about.
Well, I'm really happy the Kintsugi Heroes listeners got a chance to share that with you, mate. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you.
All the best, my friend.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond the Deluge about the 2022 floods in Broke and the Hunter Valley. If anything in this conversation has had a triggering effect, please seek support and find someone who can help keep you safe. Please share the show to your friends, family, and colleagues so we can help more people with their recovery from natural disaster. If you'd like to find out more about Kintsugi Heroes and our other podcasts, please head to kintsugiheroes.com.au. Our theme song was provided by Colin Lilly. Thanks to Matthew Bliss for editing and production, and to John Millam for hosting the conversations. And most of all, thank you to the community of Broke and the Hunter Valley for sharing their lived experience with us. We'll see you next week in Beyond the Deluge.